invite you into my studio as I create a piece that I call Held and Poured. I used 3 different mediums for this piece of art that I created on watercolor paper. The 3 mediums that I use today are watercolor, charcoal, and ink. I chose using 3 mediums because I had a specific vision in mind for this piece. And as I sketched it out and thought about my process, I really wanted the best of what all 3 of these mediums could bring for me. And I'm going to share with you what and how I did this and why I chose each medium. I also really thought about and worked within 4 values. Values are the lights and darks of a piece of art. And I really thought about it in terms of being 4 simple values. I have really been working to simplify the thought process behind my art, not overcomplicating things. And even here on the channel, I've been showing videos that are simple pen and ink and thinking in terms of 3 or 4 values. And so this piece was similar that way. And so what you'll see me doing in terms of values, which are the lights and darks, is working with the white of the paper to be the highlights, just similarly to how watercolorists do approach their work, using the white of the paper as the highlight. And then the darkest black is going to be the ink that I use a little bit later on in the process. And then the 2 values in between, which would be, I'm going to call it a slightly darker highlight, is the watercolor itself and the charcoal. And so what you see me doing here is using the watercolor. It's a color called neutral tone. That is actually the name of the watercolor on the pan, and it's called neutral tone. And I'm using it with a soft, small, flat brush to block in and lay in colors for that slightly darker highlight. But you'll see that I do use it as a darker value here and there, particularly in the recesses of the image, where, for example, where it gets very black behind the vessel into the depth of the hands. And I use it to block in what I will later create with ink. And so in a sense, I'm using this to sketch for myself and to keep myself knowing where I want my lines and shadows, but later on I'm going to layer up the different mediums into these areas. And so now I've switched to my round brush and I'm working with the pouring out and the rippling of the water, and just really thinking in terms of keeping the white highlight being the paper. I don't want to accidentally cover up those areas, but you will see me go in later with some gouache and re-enhance some of the highlights. Now, I still consider gouache to be watercolor, so I'm still considering that I used 3 mediums for this piece, but because it is gouache is a water soluble and very much used in partnership with watercolor. So I do preserve some of the highlights later or get them back again with the gouache. Once again, I'm enhancing the darkest areas with the neutral tone watercolor. But when I'm doing this, I'm thinking about where I'm going to lay down ink later. And so this is looking good to me. Of course, I let it dry. Really good in between things. Now you see me grabbing a very fine round paintbrush. And I feel that I'm using this like you would a pen. I'm drawing with this fine paintbrush. And this would typically be a technique that you use later in the finishing of an art piece, but I use it now so that I'm drawing in for myself the forms that I want to use the other mediums to enhance. And so I'm really sketching still. I still consider this to be a sketching technique, though I'm using a paintbrush. And now I'm going in and creating the lines of the broken vessel, the lines of the vessel itself, the form, using the fine tipped paintbrush with that neutral tone watercolor on it. But I'm still thinking of this as a preliminary layer that later I will use it as a guide for myself with the other mediums. And, this is the beauty of creating art on a flat surface, where we create this 3D art on a flat surface. We are using the lights and the shadows to make that flat paper come alive. And I'm having a really delightful time bringing the form of this vessel alive. I spent 7 years as a professional potter, so pottery and all that it represents, being in the potter's hands, this piece, Held and Poured, is representational of that. And I am loving being able to paint and bring the vessel to life in form on the paper. And so that's, kind of what's happening in my heart as I'm bringing this vision to life, is I'm just really thinking about the form, the light, what I really want you to see when you look upon this image, how I want the viewer to feel and react and understand what it is that I see and want to portray. And so with every decision of whether I'm adding more dark, more light, I'm thinking about those things. Now I'm going to switch to charcoal, and I use the charcoal pencil, much like you'd color with a colored pencil. And you can see that it's grabbing a hold of the tooth of the paper, which is the texture of the paper. Now this is very smooth paper, so there isn't a lot of tooth and texture. I'm going to list the tools that I use below in the description. I'm not affiliated or sponsored, but I'll list it. If you're curious, you can have a look at that. But and so that will include the kind of watercolor paper that I'm using today. But one of the main reasons I chose to use charcoal in this piece is for the texture. I wanted the hands to have texture to them, much like how skin would be weathered, and there would be a ruggedness to calluses. And I didn't want the hands to be smooth, like they never did a day of work in their life. And so the charcoal allowed me to bring grit to the piece, and it even added that grit and grime to the vessel itself, because I didn't want the vessel to appear smooth and you can see that it's a broken vessel. It's been through a lot. And so I wanted that to be portrayed, which charcoal was the perfect medium for me to do that. But keeping in mind that I didn't want to use charcoal all on its own, I felt that I wanted to lay in the other values with the watercolor, with the movement and flow of that water and paint. And then when you see me also switch to ink, you're going to see all of those deep, deep shadows just pop and get so crisp. And that's where I love how we learn through experiment. We learn with different mediums what we can do with them, and then we can bring them into a piece of art and control them. And you're also going to see here in a few minutes that I get a little experimental, and then I had to pull myself back away because I didn't want this piece to cross into experimentation at this point. It was really important for me to get my vision across through this piece, which means I wanted it to turn out. Now I'm using a really neat ink pen that has a brush tip, and the brush is very flexible. I can bend it and cover a lot of area of the paper with ink all in one swoop, all in one stroke. But I can also use the very tiny tip and get very fine lines that you'll see me creating, these very fine line cracks of the vessel. But also I'm using that very fine tip to dot and pixelate a little bit outwards with stippling, like very slight stippling, to blend into the charcoal itself. Now, as I was working on this area, I felt there was too much texture of the charcoal in the depth behind this rippling water, and I wanted to block it in more in this area that would almost be considered the background. And I felt like maybe going in with the ink would be too bold or dark. And so I switched out to a flat brush and began to watercolor with the neutral tone here. But what happened was that I was watercoloring over the charcoal, which is something I haven't experimented with a lot. I could feel it moving differently than what watercolor normally would. And I really reined myself in. And I thought, wait a second, I don't want to cross into too much experimentation. I'm not sure really how this is going to look when it's dried. So I kind of backed off, but in the end of it all, I did achieve what I was hoping to achieve. It just was a moment where I thought, I don't know, I don't know what this is gonna do. And so I'm pleased, and I was pleased enough that I thought, you know what, I wanna create some dark drips coming down from the potter's hands here. And so I use this technique. You'll see me, putting a lot of watercolor and water onto this area and then tipping the paper and letting it drip. And I was looking carefully to make sure that I didn't let any drips go into area I had reserved to be white, to be what represents the white, bright water. And so I played around here with a few drips, but I also backed myself away when I got a few. I thought, you know what, that's enough. Let's not overdo it. And then, so from here, I did a couple more drips just to keep some flow and continuity. And then I thought, you know what, that's enough. I gotta call that drip part completed. And so I'm going to finish the piece with a little bit of white gouache, small flat brush, and just enhancing the highlights of the paper that are already there, but I wanted to enhance them and really, in a sense, give them paint strokes. And I didn't cover up all of the paper though. It was important to me to let the paper be part of my artwork as well, just like a watercolorist would. But the gouache just gave a lovely painterly look, which you can probably see a little easier in person than on the screen. But these little paint strokes with the white gouache just gave a really great painterly look. I was very pleased with it. And overall, really pleased with how this piece turned out. I have matted it, put it into a mat and framed it, and it is striking. It has a very bold yet beautiful message. And in another video that I'll link below, I'm going to share the message behind this piece. It does come to me from a time of prayer, and it does represent me and you being in God's hands and us being often like broken vessels that are still being used for Him. And so this is the piece called Held and Poured. I hope that you got a little bit of inspiration on how you can use watercolor, charcoal, and ink together, how you can learn to control mediums to bring about what you really want to see in your artwork. If you've enjoyed this video, please give it the thumbs up, like it, share it with a friend. Here on the channel, you can subscribe for more videos like this. I have lots of pen and ink tutorials, and there will be more on the way. Thanks so much for being here today. May you be blessed in all you're creating.